But when you add to that the damage that was done to our bases and today's dollars for buying replacement munitions and replacement aircrafts, what has the total cost been over the last 60 days?
That number right now reflects the total cost that we're seeing.
Including buying today's dollars, the new weapons and replacements, and including the damage there? That's your testimony?
If there's adjustments to that, I would defer to the comptroller on that.
And how much are you seeing in terms of, are you asking in terms of supplemental funding just for the Iran mission from this committee?
If and when a supplemental is submitted, the majority of it would not just be for,
what would be the whole part for Iran?
Munitions related to the entirety of what we want to get done.
A number, what would you submit?
It would be within on Iran, it would be less than 25 billion, but there's a lot more we would ask for beyond just Iran.
You're saying it's 25 billion. I would just, if you come back and you want to revise those numbers, because all the experts are disagreeing with you when it comes to today's dollars and damage, but you can revise it. How much did it cost American taxpayers in terms of the strike to the Iranian school where kids were killed? You have that number? In terms of the missiles we used?
As I've said, that unfortunate situation remains under investigation.
You don't know how much it costs the taxpayer?
But I wouldn't tie a cost to that, to anything.
It's a reasonable question, no, sir? I mean, our taxpayer money was going there. Do you know how much it will cost Americans in terms of their increased cost in gas and food over the next year because of the Iran war?
I would simply ask you what the cost is of an Iranian nuclear bomb.
I'm going to give you that opportunity.
I would simply ask you what you're playing gotcha questions about domestic things. I'm not.
You're saying it's a gotcha question to ask what it's going to be in terms of the increased cost of gas?
Why won't you answer what it costs to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb?
I give you that, sir. But let me.
What would it cost? What would you pay to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear bomb? What would you pay?
I reclaim my time. Do you not know? You had no one do the analysis of what the increased cost of gas and food on the American people are going to be?
What is the cost of Iran holding that straight at issue with nuclear weapons?
It's $631 billion, which means it's an increase of $5,000 a year for American households. Now, let me give you this point. You're saying that your operation is preventing a nuclear Iran. Will you acknowledge that there is an economic cost to the American people for doing what you believe is necessary to make Iran denuclear? Will you acknowledge the economic cost?
We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than what the previous administration did to our economy, what the previous administration did for inflation,
you don't even know what the, you know what's upsetting? I reclaim my time.
COVID, and you're going to lecture this administration about the economy?
You know what is upsetting?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people. It's one thing if you said, okay, it costs the American people $5,000, but we think it's worth it. That's what we've done in World War II and other wars. Here's what it costs. You got to pay for it. You don't even know what the average American is paying. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food. Your 25 billion number is totally off. It's the incompetence. It's the incompetence. Let me ask you this. Certainly, maybe here we'll find agreement. There were still 440 pounds of low-enriched uranium, correct, when President Obama, after the JCPOA? Is that accurate?
The amounts and types are classified.
Okay. Will you acknowledge that there were 970 pounds of uranium enriched after Trump tore up the JCPOA?
The JCPOA was a terrible deal that allowed Iran a path to a nuclear bomb.
You deal with vague platitudes. I'm asking you about numbers. Like, you don't know what gas costs, you don't know what food costs, you don't know what the operation costs. You know, I get sound bites, but how about numbers? Do you know how much the enriched uranium was after you ripped up the JCPOA? Trump did.
I'll give you a number. I know that, as was stated by early on, the price of gas is twice as expensive in California, your home state, as anywhere else in the country because of the horrible policies your state pursued.
You know what? It used to be that type of stuff worked. And then you started to lose the people that you campaigned you wanted to be for, because you said you wouldn't get us into bad wars. You said you would bring down the prices. You know what I'm sad for? I'm sad for all the people who voted for Trump. I'm sad for them because you betrayed them. You betrayed a lot of that MAGA base. And you know who knows that? J.D. Vance knows that.
That's why Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank all three of you for being here today. It's a real privilege to be a part of this committee. You're the most bipartisan committee out of 20 in Congress. We have a tradition of voting on NDAs with large majorities year after year. And it's important not to be a Republican first in here or a Democrat first. We're Americans trying to ensure that our country is well defended. And in that spirit, I compliment the operations in Iran. I served 30 years in the Air Force. We were attacked repeatedly by proxy groups from Iran. On every deployment I was on, they were the number one threat where I was located. I've lost friends, like at Khobar Towers. Iran with a nuclear weapon would have been an existential threat to our country. And if they had a missile that could hit New York, they would have done it. They would have done it 2 months ago. So I support our operations there. I think it was good that we got Maduro out. You know, I would say it would be important to get the representative government that duly won their election there, and not good to replace one dictator with another dictator, but Maduro was bad for their country. And I support our 5% GDP spending. There's no way to modernize our nuclear force, 6th-generation fighters, take care of our men and women in uniform without being at 5% GDP. But also in the spirit, I share a bipartisan concern of the firings that we've seen at the Pentagon for the 6 service chiefs. For example, the Coast Guard. We had a huge bipartisan majority here that had confidence in the Army Chief of Staff and the Secretary of Navy. And I would just point out, it may be constitutionally right You have the constitutional right to do these things, but it doesn't make it right or wise. Now, my first question is dealing with the housing allowance. Something I've been working for the last 2 or 3 years. Our housing allowance is underpaying people in certain areas. And the department, and it hasn't started under this administration, it's been going on for a while, they take out 5% of the housing allowance. They send it to other needs. But that means we're underpaying our servicemen and women living off base by 5%. So we tried to fix it with a $2.9 billion line item to fix housing allowance. That money was moved. So Mr. Secretary, could you tell us how we're going to fix this? Because we have a shortfall in housing allowance, and we tried to fix it out of here, and I'd like to get it fixed.
Congressman, I agree with you. I think that is precisely the kind of quality of life issue that's been ignored time and time again. Oftentimes with good intentions of trying to do some trade-off with something else. But I mentioned the 7% pay increase. That's just for junior enlisted. It's 6% from E6 to 03, and it's 5% from 04 all the way up. But closing that gap, TRICARE reimbursement's a big one we're going to look at well. If we reimburse TRICARE lower than Medicare, then no one wants to take TRICARE, and now you don't have a real network for service members. So those places where we pinched pennies to try to eke out additional budget space have really hurt service members. So I'm committed to working with you on that to close that gap and ensure that folks can live where they are asked to serve because they can afford housing.
Yeah, I think this has already been addressed to a degree, but I just wanted to emphasize, you did put $400 million in for Ukraine. I asked you to execute it. It's important for most of us in here. It has overwhelming support. Also, I'm the chair of the Baltic Security Caucus, and we've put money in for the Baltic Security Initiative. These people love America. They love freedom more than anywhere I've ever been, and they need us. They're on the front lines with Russia. I have a question for the chairman. So we did 29 years of the nuclear alert, airborne alert, the Looking Glass mission. In 1991, we turned that off because the Cold War turned to our favor. I think we're back to where we were at. Russia's a threat. China's building a nuclear force to match ours. I think we need a Looking Glass 2 and restore that nuclear command and control survivability that gives us deterrence. Russia and China needs to know no matter what they do, we can launch those 400 ICBMs. What's your vision for the Looking Glass 2 or the follow-on?
Well, sir, as you know, right now we're looking at all 3 legs of the nuclear track to make sure that most critical backstop on our nation's most important day is reliable, redundant, and workable. And so we'll take a look at that. I know the team already deep in analysis on all from NC3 to the end state. But what I want you to know is the most important thing is the ability to execute if we had to, and we can.
For 29 years we had a plane airborne with each other on board, and gave the Pentagon, the White House, STRATCOM the assurance that we had a backup. I think we're back to the future, and I appreciate your look at it.
I just flew with them, and they were doing great work.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Chairman,
Chair, now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to talk briefly about the current U.S. doctrine and conduct of the administration in a particular event and a series of events, actually. As everybody in the dais and the witness table is aware, the Department of Defense Law of War Manual specifies that any order to kill shipwrecked persons in illegal order would constitute a war crime. It isn't suggested there's a specific example to show a clear-cut example of what this entails in our own manual. With that in mind, let's look back a few weeks ago when a fishing crew ended a long day of hard fishing, scoring a full stock of albacore and swordfish on board. Without any warning or expectation, this small Ecuadorian fishing vessel, operating about 200 nautical miles off the Galapagos Islands, was militarily engaged by U.S. forces. It was hit once, then it was hit again. Not a warning shot, not an interdiction, 2 drone strikes. Survivors described chaos and severe injuries. Our U.S. forces then handcuffed the crew at gunpoint, placed black hoods over their heads, seized and scrubbed their devices, and then held them for days. Ultimately, the crew was released, given there was no evidence to support any narco activity or any charges that may be against them. So to recap, we struck a vessel, struck it again, set fire to it as it was sinking. And as public reports say, drank their beer. We detained the survivors, and then we let them go. This should be eye-opening. Now let's go to another example, the double tap or 2-strike attack that took place on September 2nd in the Caribbean. A vessel was struck, disabled, and then struck again, killing all but 2 survivors that were left clinging to the wreckage. And this is the thing. We know this happened. We know how it happened. And the Defense Department still refuses to release the follow-up video of the killing of the shipwrecked survivors, even though they released the initial one to the public in major news networks worldwide. No difference in sources and methods in the 2 videos, but still not released to the public. Of course, the backlash was severe at the time and perhaps is being forgotten. And in predictable but ignoble display of character from this administration, fingers were pointed at one another as everyone scurried to cover in a tacit acknowledgement that this was an issue potentially violating international law. Now I've reviewed what's been available, the phony rationale that these attacks are about fentanyl trafficking, when we know fentanyl comes from China, India, through Mexico. Then the baseless argument that this was about narco-terrorism. You know, I don't believe a word of it. This was to create leverage for regime change in Venezuela. And now the president acknowledged that was about oil. Beyond the simple need for justice and